Are you considering moving to Buenos Aires in 2021? Well, if you're considering the two neighborhoods, Puerto Madero or Recoleta, we've got a video just for you today.
If you're on the hunt for an apartment in Buenos Aires, we have good news for you. We are American expats that have lived in both Recoleta and Puerto Madero, and today we're going to give you insider information on both neighborhoods. And be sure to stick around till the end of the video because we'll tell you who wins and our personal favorite.
But before we go any further, please go ahead and hit the like and subscribe buttons for this video. It will really help us.
So this video will be organized by categories. We're going to go through each category and tell you a little bit about each neighborhood, and at the end give you our winner for each one. The categories we're going to go through today are cost of living, everyday shops, activities, parks, restaurants, and overall vibe. Well, let's get into it. Our first category is cost of living.
Yeah, and so when we talk about cost of living, we're talking about your utility bills, your electricity, your water, the taxes for the neighborhood. And when you compare them side by side, Recoleta is a little bit cheaper, especially on the electricity and water and on basically on the utility side. Something that we didn't realize before we actually moved out to Puerto Madero is that some of the utilities in the neighborhoods around Buenos Aires are subsidized depending on the demographics of that neighborhood. And so that helped keep our electrical bills in Recoleta lower. And just as a comparison, when we're talking about the differences in utility bills, our electric bill while we were in Recoleta would range anywhere from 3,000 pesos to 5,000 pesos, depending on if it was summer or winter. Versus here in Puerto Madero, our electric bill, including the electric expenses for the building, usually comes out to around 11,000, 12,000 pesos per month.
So you can definitely see there's a big difference in the cost of living in Puerto Madero versus Recoleta. So if you're looking for a lower cost of living here in Buenos Aires, the winner for you is going to be Recoleta. All right, let's go into the second category now, everyday shops. So for this category, I'm thinking kind of like your hardware stores, ferreterias, your bread stores, panaderias. They have cheese shops and dress shops and boutiques, those types of things. I really think shops like that kind of give your neighborhood a special characteristic.
Yeah, that's right. And so just a couple examples. I mean, we have had to go to the local hardware store a few times in both Recoleta and here in Puerto Madero. And it just seems like the prices were a little bit higher here in Puerto Madero.
And there's just not as many. I think there's one hardware store in the entire neighborhood of Puerto Madero versus Recoleta. I probably knew of at least 4 or 5. So you just had more choices to go to. And out here in Puerto Madero, there's just not as many shops. So in Recoleta, there's a lot of unique shops. There is a gluten-free bakery. There are tons of bread stores. There was a really unique cheese shop, cheese and salami shop. And out here in Puerto Madero, you just don't have those options. They did just open a brand new bread store. Actually, it was during quarantine, I think maybe sometime in May. But before that, we didn't have access or quick access to fresh bread and medialunas and things like that here in Puerto Madero. So it's really something to consider if just having access to those everyday shops is important to you. So I think for the everyday shops category, the winner once again is going to be Recoleta.
And so next up is activities. And what we're putting under this category are things like your movie theaters, your shopping malls, tourist attractions. So in Recoleta, you can find they have a shopping mall, they have a movie theater, there's several tourist attractions. In fact, it's probably one of the most visited neighborhoods in Buenos Aires with the cemetery and a couple of other attractions.
And in Puerto Madero, they have some of those things. So there's definitely a cinema. It is a good space for people to walk around the canal and just take in the shops, have a coffee, enjoy the water and just the skyline view. But other than that, there's not really a lot of tourist attractions, and there's definitely not a mall here. So in fact, like we said earlier, there's not a lot of shopping in general. So for this category, we're gonna give a point to both Recoleta and Puerto Madero because we think it's pretty equal as far as everyday activities. But if you wanna be closer to the action where more tourist stuff is, or you want, again, to be close to a mall or a few more shops, then you're gonna wanna focus on Recoleta. The next category we wanted to talk about was parks. And I know this can be important for some people. For Andrew and I, it was super important because we have two small dogs. So when we were apartment hunting in 2018, that was pretty much a requirement for us to be within 1 block of a park. And both neighborhoods will meet that requirement for you if parks are important, if you also have dogs, or if you have children that you want to make sure have access to a park as well. In Recoleta, there are a few parks. They're not huge parks, but from what I've heard from people that have lived in large cities all their life, that they're actually pretty good sized. And there's probably 2 or 3 parks, so you definitely have your choice of which one to go to, whichever one's closest to you, depending on where you live in the neighborhood. But Puerto Madero definitely takes the cake in this category. Basically, the entire neighborhood is one big green space or park area, and it's amazing. There's tons of space. There's lots of outdoor activities you can do here. So if you're a jogger, there's tons of space to jog. If you enjoy bike riding, there's always people riding their bikes. There's people rollerblading. We always see different fitness classes.
Boot camps?
Yeah, boot camps. So there's always something going on. And if you're interested in being close to a park or it's important to you, I definitely would highly recommend Puerto Madero. It does not get any better with parks. There's not going to be a single neighborhood in Buenos Aires, any neighborhood, that has as many parks as Puerto Madero. So for this category, we're going to give the point to Puerto Madero.
And if parks and outdoor space are really important to you, I would suggest you go ahead and Google La Reserva Ecológica in Buenos Aires. It's a huge park right there on the river. It's got probably about 4 or 5 miles worth of trails that you can walk around.
Yeah, people will go bird watching in there. We definitely go jogging in there during the weekends, and they have lots of benches where you can just sit and enjoy and look out at the river and just enjoy being among nature while you're still in the city.
So next up, we're going to talk a little bit about the restaurants you can find in both neighborhoods. And again, you kind of have a different vibe in both. So in regards to Recoleta, you can find a wide range of restaurants. They typically have anything from a mom and pop, family run style, traditional food restaurants to a higher end steakhouse or Italian food. You really have a wide spectrum of choices and availability within walking distance. In regards to the restaurants you'll find here in Puerto Madero, you won't find that niche of family run, family style type restaurants. It's more, I guess you could say, corporate-y type of restaurants, starting in the kind of mid-range to higher end types of food and cuisine.
Another kind of subcategory underneath restaurants is cafes. In Recoleta, you have a lot of little coffee shops. In fact, there's some pretty famous ones as well. And every time you walk by, you're going to see people out on the sidewalk, or you'll see people in the coffee shop having a coffee, having a mate, and just enjoying a media luna with it, reading the newspaper. And you don't really have too much of that cafe vibe here in Puerto Madero. There are a few for sure, but it's definitely not the same vibe. You don't see as many people just enjoying their coffee, and it's more kind of like a Starbucks vibe out here. So we have some Starbucks, we have some Havanas, which are kind of the Argentine equivalent of Starbucks. And people are just getting their coffee and going to work or going back to their apartment or just being on the go, versus in Recoleta, people really take their time and just enjoy the whole coffee scene. So to round out the restaurant category, I think we're going to give the point to
Recoleta.
Yeah. There's definitely plenty of restaurants in Puerto Madero. You will not go hungry. There's lots to choose from, but if you're looking for a little bit more robust selection, everything from mom and pop cafes to coffee shops to your high-end steakhouses, Recoleta is going to have all of that for you. So our final category is just going to be overall vibe. So we just want to give you guys an idea of just what you can expect, what's the feel from each neighborhood, because they're both very different. We also kind of want to explain why the heck we moved from Recoleta to Puerto Madero. I'm not sure if Recoleta is in the lead right now with points, but you're probably wondering, if Recoleta's in the lead, why did I live in Puerto Madero? So we moved from Recoleta to Puerto Madero after 18 months of living there, really just because of the noise level. Like I said earlier, we lived very close to a park, a major park, and there would be musicians would come and play the guitar with the speaker. There would be a drum line come and beat their drums for 2 hours straight. And honestly, we just didn't have any peace on the weekends, and it really became a little frustrating for us. It got to where we didn't really enjoy our weekends, and so we felt like to protect our peace, we needed to move someplace that was a little less dense.
Also, when we were living in Recoleta, we found there was way more just traffic noise consistently throughout the day. We lived in front of a bus stop, so there was always a bus stopping and all the noise associated with that. And just the traffic jams, people lay on their horn for a solid 10 seconds whenever no one's moving.
Yeah.
So that also played into it a little bit too.
All right, let's talk about the overall vibe though of each neighborhood because they are very different.
When you're in Recoleta, you have a lot more of the older buildings, kind of European style. Whenever you hear that Buenos Aires is the Paris of South America, the architecture you'll see is very similar to something you might see in Europe. Over here in Puerto Madero, it's a much more modern, the buildings are much more modern. They were built more recently. You have these huge 50-story plus apartment buildings.
Yeah, I would compare Recoleta to maybe a European city like Paris, and I would compare Puerto Madero to someplace more like Dubai, I would say. If you look at the buildings from afar, it kind of looks like the Dubai skyline. So very different vibes. Also, the people that live in the areas can be kind of different too, the general population. In Puerto Madero, you'll find a lot of large companies and they bring expats over from all over the world to work here. And so a lot of them want to be close to their employer so they can walk to work each day. And Puerto Madero gives them that walkability. And the buildings are also very secure. So if safety is important to you, then Puerto Madero is a good area because each building is like a fortress. So the overall vibe in Puerto Madero is definitely, you will have Porteños that live here, of course, but you also have a lot of expats. So walking around, if we go to Starbucks or the restaurants, we see a lot of Asians, we see some Russians, you'll see Americans, you'll see Europeans. It's definitely one of the more multicultural parts of the city, and I think that's mostly because a lot of company expats choose to live here. Versus in Recoleta, the population is definitely going to be more Porteño heavy. So you're going to have mostly Argentines, and as a whole, the population is a little bit older than I would say some of the other neighborhoods. There's definitely more retirees in the neighborhood that we noticed compared to here in Puerto Madero. There's definitely still families and couples and even singles in the area, but the demographics definitely lean towards an older population. In Puerto Madero, also the overall vibe just kind of entails a lot of workers. So there are some office buildings here in the area, and there's a lot of workers that will come from all over the city just for the day to come to work. So if you're walking around during lunchtime, you're definitely going to have a larger crowd, people that are at lunch trying to get food. There's more people that are just here for the day and they leave at night and it's very empty at night. Same with the weekends. There's a lot of people we've talked about earlier that come just to enjoy the park for the day and then they go home. So there's definitely a smaller population that live here full time, but it does kind of swell up during the weekdays and also on the weekends when people want to enjoy the parks. In Recoleta, I would say the overall vibe is very neighborhood feeling. There's not really too many office buildings, if any, that we notice. There's lots of apartments, there's apartment homes, there's lots of tourist activities you can do.
There's a couple museums in the area as well. There was times while we were living in Recoleta where there would actually be tour buses full of people that would just stop and park on our block. And as you're going, if you needed to go take the dogs out or you were trying to walk somewhere, off come 40, 50 tourists, and it's just, that also is something you need to consider when choosing your apartments, the amount of tourists that will be in the area.
Yeah, Recoleta is a very touristy area. I'm sure if you've been doing any research on BA, you've noticed that a lot of the tourist activities are actually in that neighborhood or right next to that neighborhood. So you have more of a tourist and homey feel over there versus in Puerto Madero, it's kind of more a work crowd. So it looks like from our tally marks, the winner is gonna be Recoleta. And while we absolutely love Recoleta, we loved living there. It was an amazing neighborhood. It was a great place to explore BA from. Our personal favorite, since we moved here obviously, is probably gonna have to be Puerto Madero. Well guys, we hope you enjoyed this video and we hope you learned something new about the two neighborhoods, Recoleta and Puerto Madero. If you have any other questions, let us know in the comments below and we'll definitely get back to you. And if there's enough interest, maybe we'll do another video. And before you go, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel because we'll be back next week with some more expat living content. All right, bye guys.
Bye.